Hello, and welcome to St. Andrew. It is my privilege to welcome you here today from the St. Andrew Sanctuary. I am grateful, as always, to share this sacred online space with you, where we are all invited, included, and valued as vital and beloved members of our broader worshiping community. St. Andrew is proud to be an open, affirming, inclusive congregation that welcomes all people into the full life and communion of our church. This includes saints and sinners, believers and skeptics, the lost and the found, the wanderers and the wanderers, families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along life's journey. No matter who you are or where you've been, no matter what you believe or even if you believe anything at all, you are welcome here and you belong here. If you have any questions about our church, prayer requests for our care team, or if you would like to get in touch with a member of our pastoral team or staff, please email info@gosaintandrew.com. If you would like to explore deeper engagement with the St. Andrew community through our many classes, group life gatherings, and service opportunities, you can email us directly at connect@gosaintandrew.com. We'd love to hear from you. Lastly, to contribute a financial gift to the work and ministry of St. Andrew, you can always visit gosaintandrew.com/give or text St. Andrew to 28950. And now, let's listen together to this week's scripture and sermon.
As he walked along, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it's someone like him." He kept saying, "I am that man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I do not know." The formerly blind man answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see."
This morning, we enter week 4 of the Lenten season, continuing our exploration of God's eternal promise to bestow on each of us a crown of beauty instead of ashes. You know, it's okay to admit that Lent is a weird season in the life of the church, but it's also vital and necessary. Lent is traditionally a season of self-exploration, a journey of self-sacrifice, and a movement from what is to what is meant to be. Lent is a season of invitation, to pause, to stillness and silence, as we ponder the passion of Christ in preparation for Easter's glory and contemplate what it means for us personally and corporately. The original, literal meaning of the Old English word Lent is to lengthen. In the northern hemisphere, as the earth slowly emerges from winter's dark, the daylight hours lengthen and natural signs of new life appear. Trees sprout tender green leaves. Infant birds break free from their shells. It's spring. It's their birthday. And they are hungry. Maybe you're hungry too. For light, or renewal, are simply to be seen and acknowledged as one who is and has always been beloved. Hope and hunger for transformation are good. Notice them. Feel their creative energy urging you forward from within. The season of Lent is a time of cleansing and purging the lifeless ashes we carry. By letting them out and letting them go, we make room for the grace and freedom and beauty that only God can give us. As we heard, our reading this morning comes to us from the Gospel according to John, written somewhere between the end of the 1st century and the beginning of the 2nd century. The structure of the Gospel has most frequently been viewed in 2 parts. The first, sometimes called the Book of Signs, covers chapters 1 through 12, and the second, labeled the Book of Glory, chapters 13 through 20. In the first section, it depicts Jesus' public ministry. There he performs several wondrous deeds, engages in discussion with opponents and the crowds, and moves freely between Galilee and Judea. In chapters 13 through 20, Jesus is restricted to discussions with his disciples alone and to the Passion experience. Our story of the encounter with the blind man this morning details one of 7 wonder stories within John's Gospel. The author of the Gospel refers to these miraculous deeds not as miracles, but rather as signs. Semeo, it is in the Greek. It's important to notice that the other 3 Gospels use this term, semeo, in reference to wonders only to suggest an illegitimate request for a demonstration of power, or as an expression of the inbreaking of God announced by Jesus. In John, the signs or wonders are indications of the identity of the person of Jesus and point to the bringer rather than that which is being brought. The actual wondrous deed performed by Jesus is not the critical point of the narrative. Rather, as a sign, it points to something beyond itself, to what an encounter with Jesus signifies. So remember the story with me. Jesus is in Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. This is one of the most popular feasts. People flock to Jerusalem for 8 days. In memory of their wilderness sojourn, they lived in tents and booths. The festival took place in the autumn when the harvest were in. One day, Jesus and his disciples were strolling along, and his disciples saw what they considered to be a pitiful sight. A man who had been born blind from birth, groveling and begging in the gutter. Intrigued by the man's horrible plight, the disciples asked Jesus a difficult theological question. Why? Why was this man born blind? Who sinned? Was it this man or his parents' iniquity that caused this? Now, we probably need to pause here for a moment. I feel like we need to point out that in the ancient world, the idea that any experience of hardship, physical or otherwise, was the result of some transgression and thus a natural consequence of God's or a God's judgment was a completely reasonable assumption. As persons who were born blind or could not walk or had the debilitating disease of leprosy or were simply poor, they were marginalized and looked down upon as transgressors and were shunned. This may sound barbaric to our modern sensibilities. Still, we need to remember that from the moment humankind could think at all, we have sought reasonable explanations for the suffering we experience and encounter. Had we lived in the 1st century world of Jesus, our view of this man might not have differed from that of his disciples. So next, Jesus uses his saliva to make mud, which he smeared on the man's eyes. He told him to wash off the mud in the pool of Siloam. The man obeyed, and returned with his vision restored. When the man returns with his sight restored, his neighbors could not believe that he is the same man. Some said he was. Others said he only looked like the blind one who used to beg. And he assured them he was the one-time blind man. And they asked him how this happened. How was his sight restored? In all honesty, he didn't know how it happened. This man Jesus rubbed some mud in his eyes, told him to wash it off, and his sight was restored. Even when questioned by the religious rulers about how this happened and where this Jesus character was, the man answered that he didn't understand how it occurred or even where Jesus was. He knew only one thing. I was blind, but now I can see. It is a fascinating story, layered with meaning. Jesus restores vision to the blind man. But as I mentioned earlier, this sign seems to point to something beyond itself. Of course, the story's irony is that the blind man receives his sight, but everyone else loses theirs. Not their physical vision, but their capacity to believe and understand what they have witnessed. I'm curious. I'm curious if we still see things that way sometimes. Do we see value in every single person? Do we see abundance in others or deficiency? Now, it's clear from the text that Jesus did not see scarcity in this man or anyone for that matter. He did not point a finger or assign blame regarding the man's condition. Jesus answered them saying, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. Now, I don't believe that Jesus is saying that God caused this man's blindness for this moment. Perhaps he is inviting his disciples and all of us to see with his eyes, to see abundance and possibility rather than sin and blame. Maybe this is the point of what's happening here. It's an invitation to exchange our blindness for God's vision. So I ask, do we see with the eyes of Christ? Now look, I'm not pointing fingers. I fully admit that at times, especially when I'm driving down I-25, I see scarcity all around me to an alarming degree. Maybe you can relate. I've noticed that when I'm driving down the highway, anyone who is driving slower than me is an idiot, and on the flip side, anyone who's driving faster than me is a maniac. Be you fast or slow, all I see is deficiency, and blame is freely offered to all, because I'm the only one who knows how to drive, which should be obvious to everybody. I mean, it sounds funny, but this self-realization got me thinking, is it possible that our blindness allows us to draw lines where God did not intend? Have I made room for God's grace and light in the world? Or do my beliefs limit the possibility of growth and new vision? I hope not. I pray daily for grace, that I see others with an open heart, a willing spirit guided by charity, and a desire to serve. I want to see with the eyes of Christ. So how can we find vision for our blindness? How can we begin to see with the eyes of Christ? Well, first, I think it all begins with the way we see others. Where we see scarcity and blame, Christ sees abundance and possibility. Seeing like Christ means seeing in every single person. Let me say that again. Every single person, abundance and possibility. In other words, people need other people. No one lives a life in isolation. We were never meant or designed to live in isolation. All growth and spiritual growth occurs within the context of relationships. The primary mark of our humanity in relationships is not found simply by exercising kindness towards our neighbor. Rather, our humanity finds expression because we have a neighbor and recognize him, or her, or them as such. Regardless of any dissimilarity between one person and another, one group and another, they can and must exist in relationship with and for each other. People need other people. Every encounter with another is truly a gift. It's an opportunity to learn, grow, and cultivate a relationship that can enhance your understanding of yourself and the world you live in. Just suppose that we will ever get past the division and polarity that plagues our current age. In that case, we must begin by casting off our own blindness and working to truly see and value others as Christ does. And that means everyone, not just those who happen to agree with us. In one of the little rural congregations I served in Texas, I met a gentleman named J.B. J.B. was in his 90s when we met. He lived alone in the same house he was born in. Now, on the surface, he was stubborn, hard-headed, set in his ways. He didn't have much, but what he had was his, and no one was going to tell him how to live. J.B.'s theological views were conservative, to say the least. Well, alarmingly conservative, actually. So my initial thought, what I saw, was a man who had very little to offer, and even less of a desire to listen. But then I decided to put that aside, and I began to see something else. I watched this frail man loyally attend services every single Sunday without fail. I watched as he thoughtfully read his Bible daily, followed by his prayers and quiet meditation. I saw him kneel and weep as he regularly visited his beloved wife's grave. We sat on his porch. We watched TV together. I listened to stories about his childhood and his long life, and slowly began to see him. Beloved, J.B. taught me more about personal piety, loyalty, and discipline than anyone I have ever met. He was gentle. He was generous and full of love for Christ and His church family. Now, I don't think I ever really changed J.B.'s theological views, but I can say today that I am a better man for knowing him. The gift of his friendship is a treasure I will always value. Finding vision for our blindness, seeing with the eyes of Christ, begins by seeing abundance and possibility in everyone. And this brings me to my second point. Seeing like Christ means that we must also do something. Seeing, in this sense, is not simply a passive activity. It also involves active involvement. This man in the story did not ask to be healed. He was just there. And while the disciples saw this as an opportunity to mince words, Jesus saw it as an occasion to do something. To solidify this point, right before Jesus smears mud on the man's eyes, He tells His disciples, "We must work the works of Him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work." Friends, I want you to notice the sense of urgency in these words. and the gracious use of the plural we. We must work the works of him who sent me. All of us. And friends, there is no shortage of work to be done, and the day is short. Beloved, we must not belittle or ignore this world in which we have been set to play our part, neglecting our calling to help and serve others as we hope and wait for some future glory. It doesn't take a grand gesture. It simply requires eyes that see and a heart willing to help. I read a beautiful quote by Beth Clark this week, reminding me of the power of simple acts of charity. She writes, "I've noticed something about people who make a difference in the world. They hold the unshakable conviction that individuals are extremely important, that every life matters. They get excited over one smile. They are willing to feed one stomach, educate one mind, and treat one wound. They aren't determined to revolutionize the world all at once. They're satisfied with small changes. Over time, though, the small changes add up. Sometimes they even transform cities, nations, and yes, the world. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world," said Christ. But then, as we read in Matthew 5:14, Christ claims this title and office for himself and all of his followers. You are the light of the world. No doubt Christ is the source of our light, and we shine only by the light he reflects upon us. Yet the dark and sterile moon lights the sky at night for multitudes. The moon reflects from its native dullness a radiance that is not natural to it, catching glory from the sun, and is itself transfigured by it, sharing it with others. In and through Christ, we are meant to be the light of the world, helping others see their own road, changing night into day for them, and enriching and beautifying life here and now. My prayer for myself is my prayer for all of us. I pray every day for grace and courage that we will truly see others with open hearts and a willing spirit guided by charity and a desire to serve. So let us shed our blindness and accept the vision of Christ by seeing abundance in everyone we meet, abundance and possibility, and accepting our calling to spread the light of Christ through acts of love and service. Amen.